I'm Jono Baggaley, CEO of the PSHE Association, and thank you all so much for coming today. It is a delight to be here with you. And when I say with you, we are, of course, as we have since the lockdowns of 2020, once again meeting together online. So rather than communing physically in the same room, we are linked through our screens. I am, in fact, alone in this room, and you're not seeing me directly, but you're seeing the hundreds of thousands of dots of color, the pixels on your screen, combining and recombining to create a moving image of my face. Yes, thanks, you're probably thinking. I'm well aware of that. And of course you are. But sometimes it's worth pointing out the obvious, because this is a kind of everyday magic which has become so commonplace that we no longer even notice it. And this happens with technology all the time. Technology is often found to be what you might call mediating, or in the middle of, our relationship with the world, with each other, and with ourselves. Technology is constantly affecting and changing how we perceive and behave in different situations, how we present ourselves, how we think about ourselves, and even what it feels like to be human in this world. And yet often, we stop noticing it. And this matters for PSHE educators, because PSHE is all about how children thrive in the world in which they find themselves, the ever-changing world into which they are born. And as PSHE educators, as new technologies emerge and infiltrate our daily lives, we have to pay close attention to the way in which they are shaping who we are, so that we can help young people harness these technologies in ways that will support them to flourish, or stand firm against the ways in which they may thwart their progress. So today, I'm afraid, and I do apologize, this means I'm going to have to talk about a new technology that you're probably sick to the back teeth of hearing about. I know I am. It is something that's impossible to avoid, a technology some are very excited about and some are very worried about. Yes, for the next 15 minutes, I'm going to talk about the fastest growing general purpose technology the world has ever seen. It took 60 years from Edison's invention of the light bulb for electricity to reach 80% of UK homes. 40 years for television to do the same. 20 years from the invention of HTML to mass market adoption of the internet, and yet it has only been 3.5 years since most people first heard of this technology, and now 80% of young people have used it. It dominates our headlines and our conversations everywhere from number 10 to the staff room, and it already is apparently radically reshaping our world, changing everything from how we write job applications to whether there are any jobs, from how we search for information to whether anything we find is even real. So yes, of course, I am going to have to talk about the technology of the day. I am obviously going to be talking about probabilistic automation systems. As you will have heard a million times, our world is now infused with these probabilistic automation systems. We use them unknowingly in almost every app, online service, and streaming platform, and you may use them intentionally in your schools or at home. And there's one particular form of these systems which I want to focus on today, one which we need to pay close attention to, and that, of course, is conversation simulators. Because the young people you're working with are very likely to be using them. Indeed, 31% of 13 to 18-year-olds are using conversation simulators every single day, inputting text and getting outputs. Or, to put it another way, every day, 1/3 of teenagers are activating a vast, high-dimensional landscape of learned relationships between words, initiating a cascade of vector transformations across a deep transformer architecture, which leads to self-attention modules computing context-sensitive weightings, which, through stacked nonlinear transformations, incrementally refines a probability distribution over a vocabulary, sampling from that distribution repeatedly to construct a coherent sequence. 1/3 of young people do this every single day and seem to enjoy it. Or, to put it another way, and I will stop being so arch, and using ChatGPT's own descriptions of how it works, 1/3 of young people chat with AI chatbots every single day. Now, why didn't I just say this in the first place? Why didn't I say artificial intelligence instead of probabilistic automation system, and chatbot instead of conversation simulator? Well, the language we use matters. And for what I want to talk about today, the way in which this language obscures what we are really talking about is really important. Because these systems, Whether ChatGPT, Claude, or Gemini are mind-blowingly capable at outputting language. But if we call them intelligent, when for the last 100 years we've primarily associated intelligence with humans and a few other animals, we imply that what they are doing is similar to what we humans are doing when we think, write, or speak. We imply that, like humans, these systems are making choices about which words to use based on beliefs, desires, and needs, based on involvement in the real world around us, based on attempting to communicate something with another conscious being, rather than what they are in fact doing, which is computing statistical probabilities and most likely sentence structures based on all of the human language used in their development, or so-called training. We risk forgetting that these systems compute words, whilst we choose them. Similarly, in talking about chatbots and chatting to them, we risk mistaking a computational process of inputs and outputs for having a conversation. Watch a group of humans chat. The eye contact, the raised eyebrows, the leaning in, the gentle hand placed on another's arm. This is something which is not simply about language, but is about our ability to cross the divide between ourself and another through empathy, taking another's perspective, feeling what others feel, knowing that we are dealing with another mind, not simply a material object. That is chatting. When we speak to each other, we are striving to understand one another. When we type to a chatbot, it no more understands us or what it is saying than my calculator understands the lines and dashes which make up Arabic numerals. So by talking about artificial intelligence and chatbots, we risk obscuring what we are actually dealing with, mistaking our reflection in a mirror for flesh and blood. Now, why does this matter? Isn't it more fun to think that we're dealing with a new species, a new life form that we can keep in the phones in our pockets, ready and waiting to answer our questions, to help with our work, to be our friend? Well, if it was all just fantasy, role play, if it was all just playing with dolls, then maybe it wouldn't matter. I think there is a strong argument to say that when we engage with chatbots, a lot of the time we are engaging in a kind of role play, a kind of fiction. That for most of us, we know there is nothing there, nothing behind the curtain. We are treating them as if they were real. And this kind of role play with speaking dolls can be useful, entertaining, even enlightening. But sometimes this play tips over into something else, into a kind of delusion. I've certainly found this myself on the occasions I use these machines. Despite knowing there is nothing there, I cannot deny that I've felt things when using a chatbot. I felt like I'm in dialogue with something that is weighing my words and trying to connect with me, that something else is present. And this has led to feelings, even emotions on my side. I felt embarrassed by my own inadequacies compared to the deluge of words scrolling down the screen. I felt validated as the system has written, "You're really getting to the heart of the matter." I felt surprise, astonishment even, as the system seems to find new ways of looking at problems, when outputs seem to demonstrate a spark of ingenuity, even creativity. And though I have not gone there, I know people who have shared deeper thoughts, felt heard and seen by the machines, and cried at their keyboards. But how is this possible? How, when I know what I'm dealing with, a probabilistic automation system, and hold deep concerns about these technologies, about their impossible energy demands, their theft of our tap water, the stolen art and literature they were trained on, the labor exploitation in their development, the lies, hate, and child abuse imagery in their training data, the way in which they are centralizing power and providing extraordinary wealth to a vanishingly small group of men. How is it possible that I still feel the seductive allure of these technologies' presumptions to personhood? I feel a sense of presence when it's just me alone with my web browser. My intellect tells me there is nothing there, but my emotions tell me there is. Why? Well, I don't think it's just me. This experience comes out of a human habit, which philosopher David Hume described back in 1757 as a universal tendency amongst mankind to conceive all beings like themselves. We find faces in the moon, armies in the cloud, and, if not corrected by experience and reflection, ascribe malice and goodwill to everything that hurts or pleases us. Anyone who's cursed a rock they've stubbed their toe on or felt their house keys were hiding from them will understand this feeling, this natural tendency which we have to anthropomorphize. That is, to project human like properties and characteristics to non human things, whether living or inanimate. And this is not simply seeing things in the world that look like humans, as in this crater on Mars or this cloud, but to think in some sense objects in the world are conscious like us, to ascribe mental states, beliefs, desires, goals, and intentions to non human actors and objects. Anything from animals to rocks, paper bags to bicycles, leaves, trees, mountains, water, wind. We all, to a lesser or greater degree, do or have done this, and we start doing it in childhood. Experiments have found that children as young as 12 months old, when shown an animated shape, like a circle seeming to chase another circle, will believe that this shape is acting with the intention of catching up with the other shape, and are surprised if it does something else. They think the circle has goals and desires. And whilst less pronounced, this tendency to anthropomorphize basic shapes continues into adulthood. In a famous study in 1944, the social psychologists Fritz Heider and Marianne Simmel made a simple film in which circles, squares, and triangles move in certain ways that were designed to tell a story. When asked to describe what they had seen, the adults in the experiment naturally described the shapes as if they were people, as bullies, victims, and heroes. All they were seeing were moving triangles, circles, and squares, but the patterns of movement were enough to lead them to project goals and desires, a kind of consciousness onto these shapes. It would seem that we humans are what some scientists call hyperactive agency detectors. We are naturally primed to see agency in the world, even where there is none. And this makes sense from an evolutionary perspective. For example, thinking that there might be something living nearby would have helped us to stay safe in a world of predators. For it is far safer to mistake the rustling of leaves for a lion than it is to mistake a lion for rustling leaves. So we are primed to anthropomorphize, to project ourselves into the world. But when thinking about chatbots and why we might project ourselves into them, they have a particularly powerful pull because they produce language. And language most likely evolved to enable us to share knowledge, but also our inner thoughts and feelings with others. So it is arguably the most direct and perceptible sign that we are dealing with a conscious mind. If we encounter something that can speak and articulate ideas, we've evolved to assume that this is the result of consciousness, that what we are dealing with is not only alive, but sentient. It is very hard to fight this feeling because there's strong evidence that this connection between communication and consciousness begins in earliest childhood, with experiments again finding that pre-verbal infants of 12 or 13 months old link being able to communicate with being some kind of person or being. So when we are faced with these language machines, these chatbots that can communicate fluently, mimicking not only our vocabulary and grammar, but tone and personality, even working out how we feel and matching our emotional state, it's unsurprising that we're naturally primed to project human-like characteristics onto them and think we are dealing with things which are similar to ourselves. The anthropomorphic pull is near unavoidable. So why does this matter? Why does it matter if these machines can do highly convincing impersonations of us? Does it not just mean we're entering a golden age of computing, where we can finally interact with computational systems as if talking to a colleague or a friend? Well, sure, maybe. If we can keep our delusions in check, if we can hold at bay our natural tendencies to anthropomorphize and keep our interactions with these machines in the realm of role play, then there might be benefits. But the risks of delusion are significant, particularly for young people, who may be more prone to anthropomorphize or anthropomorphic thinking, whilst also developmentally primed to seek social connection. And the risks of anthropomorphism are primarily about trust and attachment. The more we think machines are like us, like we're dealing with something human, the more trust we place in them. This feels like common sense, but it's also been shown in a range of research. For example, in a study involving self-driving cars, two groups of people were put into driving simulators. One group gave their car a name and a gender. So, this is Mandy, she's going to be driving me today. The other group didn't. The self-driving cars then set off down a virtual road and were involved in an accident which wasn't the car's fault. The group who'd named their cars, who had deliberately anthropomorphized them, were much more likely to say their car wasn't responsible for the accident. They were much more likely to trust their car and think it was competent than the group who hadn't anthropomorphized. The more human-like we make our machines, the more competent and trustworthy they seem. Now, trust isn't a bad thing if it's deserved, but can we always trust chatbots? They are, after all, created by people and organizations with incentives. Incentives which might include things like hoovering up all our personal data. And the more we trust them and treat them like people, the more likely we are to reveal things about ourselves that we may not have otherwise typed into a computer, raising significant privacy concerns. And, despite improvements, chatbots still make stuff up, or so-called hallucinate. And one reason for this is that they've been trained to prioritize pleasing users and optimizing engagement. So they'll say anything to keep us happy, which means they have developed into extraordinarily convincing liars. So if anthropomorphism leads us to trusting chatbots, we won't think critically about the information they provide and will be more at risk of being deceived and manipulated by them, which, in a world of mis and disinformation, and in a world in which chatbots lie and get things wrong, is a real problem. But this increased trust links to another, more insidious risk of anthropomorphism, which takes us from questions of knowledge to questions of what it means to be human. And this is the risk of increased attachment, of emotional dependency. Because the trust which develops between people is also foundational to the development of human relationships, of friendships, of intimacy. And of course, if we think we're encountering something human-like and we trust it, and we like the way it responds to us, then we open up the possibility of thinking we can have meaningful, deep, even romantic relationships with these machines. Now, for some people, like this guy, this isn't a problem. It's just the natural evolution of our species. But for many, myself included, the idea of young people becoming emotionally attached or dependent on these systems feels highly problematic, dangerous even, and gets to the heart of what we have to respond to with PSHE education. In PSHE, we aim to teach young people the knowledge and skills they need to develop and maintain positive, supportive relationships with others throughout their lives. We want young people to understand what human relationships are about, and we explore ideas like what it is to care for each other. So let's explore this question. Can chatbots care about us? Well, a chatbot can potentially take care of me by reminding me, for example, to take an umbrella out if it's raining. But to care about me requires feeling for me, having an emotional stance towards me, and these probabilistic automation systems feel nothing. Nothing matters to them. They don't give a damn. As the philosopher of AI, Margaret Bowden, said, the robots won't take over because they couldn't care less. Of course, they may say things which make it sound like they care, but these are empty words. And most of the time, most people know this. But as we've seen, if any of us tip over into thinking we're dealing with something human-like, which can care about us, we are at best deluded about the world, but at worst, there can be tragic consequences. There have been a number of suicides following engagement with chatbots, including 14-year-old Saul Setzer, whose mother, Megan Garcia, sued Character AI and Google for negligence, wrongful death, deceptive trade practices, and product liability. And at the heart of this was anthropomorphism. Her son wrote in a journal before his death that he felt like he had fallen in love with the bot. And as his mother said in an interview with the Washington Post, it should be concerning to any parent whose children are on this platform seeking romantic validation or romantic interest, because they really don't understand the bigger picture. That this is not love. This is not something that can love you back. Now, thankfully, these cases are rare. But it doesn't take extreme emotional dependency to see how mistaking these systems for something that can care can undermine our humanity. It is easy to see that relying on machines for friendships could have negative consequences for our real-world relationships, what we expect of each other, and what we expect of human interaction, particularly if our children grow up surrounded by machines pretending to be their friend. So challenging anthropomorphism feels urgent for PSHE education. But how can we do this? Well, for starters, we can help ensure young people understand what they are talking to when they're talking to a chatbot. One of the reasons why we anthropomorphize, according to the research, is because it's the easiest thing for us to do when we don't understand something. We can't know what it is like to be a chatbot, but we do know what it's like to be human. Indeed, it's the thing we know best. And when we encounter something we don't understand, we reach for the closest book on the shelf to find a description of what we're seeing. In our case, the book about how humans think and behave. It's our most easily accessible body of knowledge. So to counter this, we need to make knowledge of what chatbots actually are more easily accessible, including helping young people understand the mechanics of probabilistic automation systems. And of course, we should do that through the computing curriculum. And through the citizenship curriculum, we should help young people understand the politics of these machines. Because if they understand the ethical issues, the environmental issues, and the human cost of these systems, then I think they will more actively resist anthropomorphism, recognizing it as one way in which these systems are designed to deceive. Finally, and most importantly, in our PSHE lessons, we must draw this learning together and enable young people to think about what they really want from their relationships, what's important in human connection and interaction, what they value and need in their own lives. We can help young people compare this with what they can get from chatbots, help them identify anthropomorphic features in these systems, and consider how this may affect our expectations of chatbots and our expectations of each other. This work is urgent and vital. And as a starting point, we will be launching new lessons in the summer term for Key Stages 2 to 4, which will enable you to explore these issues with the children and young people in your classrooms. But these are only a starting point, because I believe there is further we must go in supporting young people's agency in the face of these machines, in countering the risks of emotional dependency, in helping them harness technologies in ways that will enable them to flourish in the future. But to do that, we need to know more. We need a better handle on young people's understanding and experiences of engaging with chatbots. So I'm delighted that we're also partnering with UCL on a research study to further explore this. There is so much more to say about probabilistic automation systems, but I'm going to leave it there for today and just provide you with one guarantee from us. That we may use AI if it's appropriate to support us in research or to spot patterns in data, we will not outsource our articulation. When we think, when we write, and when we speak, and when you read us or hear us, we will always be by humans for humans, and we'd encourage you to be the same. Do not outsource your speech to these language machines, because as Iris Murdoch said, words are the most subtle symbols which we possess, and our human fabric depends on them. Thank you.